Good morning, Mr. Slacker. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Chairperson.
Mr. Tsotsi, the oath you took yesterday will continue to apply today.
Thanks, Chairman. The exercise I was given yesterday had something to do with my lack of sleep, so if I doze off during this, please excuse me.
No, that's all right. I'm sure Mr. Slager will make sure he keeps you awake. There is one question that I didn't ask you yesterday, which I want to ask you before Mr. Slager proceeds. When Mr. Tony Gupta said to you that they are the ones who put you into this position and they can take you out of the position, why didn't you ask him, how did you put me into this position? What are you talking about? I don't know that you put me into this position.
That's a valid question, Chairman. At the time, I was in the state of mind that I was quite upset from the previous meeting I had with the minister. And I just saw a conspiracy looming. And so by the time I got to him, I was basically fed up and I just wanted to get away. So I didn't have the presence of mind to ask him. And I really didn't want to entertain any discussion with him.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, we may get to a point where we might have more discussion about allegations that the Guptas put up names of people that they wanted to be appointed to boards of SOEs and in certain government departments, certain strategic positions. We might get to the point where we discuss that. But I just thought that it was interesting that he said that to you. Because from the way you say he said it, he seemed to think that they were responsible for you being the chairperson. Maybe they didn't, but he wanted you to realize that maybe to think he had a lot of power or they had a lot of power. But from your point, from your side, your evidence was, at least in regard to your first term, you had not shown any interest of wanting to be a member of the board of Eskom. You were just approached and to ask whether you would be interested, and you supplied your CV, and in due course you were appointed. So one just wonders whether, without your knowing, it may be that you were identified as somebody that they would like to get onto the board in the belief on their part that maybe you would do whatever they might want you to do, and maybe you were got rid of ultimately, maybe because you didn't prove to be what they wanted. So you see the thinking.
Yes, I see.
Yes, but it's just that these allegations are there that they were influential, trying to put people that they wanted in certain positions for their own purposes.
In fact, Chairman, you speaking about their demonstration of their power, you just reminded me of something which I omitted to mention. It just occurred to me now as you were speaking. In one of those visits when I was at Saxonwold, at their residence, what happened is that Tony Gupta produced something. He said, I want you to look at something, but I can't give it to you. I said, okay, what is that? He showed me transcripts of, I think it was SMS or messages, in any case, telephone messages. And these were conversations amongst the board, my board members, who at the time, this is now the previous board before the new board. They happened to have an SMS or a WhatsApp group that they used to talk about the business of the company. I was not part of that group, but he then shows me, and I read this and I see that, you know, it's a discussion by all the various board members. Well, I'd say maybe about half of the board, maybe three-quarters of the board. And I was quite taken aback. I said, where do you get this from? He said, don't worry about that, Chairman. Don't worry about it. I just wanted to let you know that we've got our own sources. So I took this to be kind of a power play. You know? It says, listen, if you mess with me, this is
I will find out if you, what you say, some people will tell me, or whatever you do, they will tell me.
Correct.
Well, that's quite an important piece of information. And you say that the members of the WhatsApp group that were taking part in that conversation, it was about half the board.
Yes, it was about half or just maybe 2/3 of the board.
Yes. That's quite significant. I know I have read a report of some investigation, I don't know if it's a Fundudzi report, which said their investigations revealed that at a certain time, and I can't remember which year, at a certain time, a number of board members at Eskom and Transnet, I think, and now, were people who seemed to have some or other association with the Guptas. And in regard to some, that report reflected that their CVs had gone to the Department of Public Enterprises, the Office of the Minister, through a Gupta-related email address. And I think that either that report or another one also linked at a certain time most of the members of the NEL board as associated in one way or another with the Guptas. So it's all of these things that make one think when you hear statements like, we are the ones who put you there, we can take you out, you know, or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, maybe we should go into that point before we move away from it.
Yes.
Because Mr. Tsotsi deals with a part of it already in his affidavit. Mr. Tsotsi, that's on page 25 of your affidavit. It starts on page 25 under the heading Salim Essa. Although what you do there is to deal with the composition of the subcommittees. Are you there on page 25 or paragraph 20, under paragraph 20? You see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So my first encounter with Mr. Essa was at one of the TNA breakfast. So that's the first encounter. You turn the page, page 26, paragraph 20.3. And there you say the other occasion was when the new board came into being, where I was required to place board members in subcommittees of the board. Salim Essa sent me his configuration and asked that I pass it on to the minister as my submission. Well, this is about the subcommittees. The chairperson was specifically asking about the board itself. So your affidavit deals with the composition of the subcommittees, but maybe it's related. Let's hear how you deal with it. 20.4 then says, I quietly ignored his submission and sent mine to the minister, whereupon the minister responded with the exact submission I had received from Salim Essa. I kept going back and forth with this process of chopping and changing the allocations with the minister until she called me to a meeting. At the meeting was Salim Essa and Tony Gupta. She merely informed me that the board allocations will be the way she had sent to me. This she did in the presence of these two gentlemen. Then you go on to say, I did not know if Mr. Essa had any involvement in my resignation from the board. Mr. Essa was never present at any of the meetings I had with Tony Gupta. Now, I believe that this aspect did come up on the first occasion that you testified here before this commission, and that the chairperson asked you whether you have that submission, a copy of that submission given to you by Mr. Essa, and your submission to the minister, and the minister's submission to you. You recall that?
Yes, I do.
And can you recall whether you do have copies of those submissions?
No, I don't have them. I never had them.
No, what do you mean you never had? Because you did receive.
I'm talking about the last time I was here. I hadn't had them.
I see.
And did you try to get them after the last time, or was it a situation where you couldn't really try? You would have no idea where to start because of the lapse of time.
Chair, I remember when I left, we had agreed I'd make an attempt to try to get them, or at least get information that would corroborate what I was saying. I tried to get them through Eskom, but I was not successful. And the people who were working with me at the time, they didn't have any of the material, nor did they have any sight of what I'd done.
Would you have received them, those that you received from both Mr. Essa and the minister, would you have received them through your personal laptop, computer, or it would have been an Eskom computer? And those that you sent to the minister, do you know?
What my recollection is that it was an Eskom email.
Eskom computer?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, I don't know, Mr. Selek. You might wish to talk to investigators.
Yes.
You know, sometimes they have ways of unearthing documents that you don't think can be found. So that should be tried.
Indeed.
Yeah.
We will certainly do so, Chair.
Yes.
And then I know that I had made the same request to Mr. Tsotsi.
Oh.
Yeah. To search. And it came out again with a not. But we will do further research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. It's just that if we could find those documents, it would be great. But if we don't find them, then we don't find them. I just want us to at least try.
Yes,
Yeah.
I accept.
Yeah. Well, you know, in this commission, the commission has been lucky sometimes. I said to the legal team dealing with Busasa and the investigation team, they must go to the Victoria Guest House where Mr. Agrizi had said Ms. Nomvula Mukonyane's 50th birthday had been held. And I said they need to talk to the owners there, try and find out whether there was such a thing. And they went there. And interestingly, although the owner said, no, we didn't host the 50th birthday party for Ms. Mukonyan, but he said we did host the 40th, which was 18 years ago. But he was able to get invoices of 18 years ago. So those were put up.
Yes.
I also said in relation to Busasa, legal team and the investigation team, because there was two different versions about whether Busasa had done some work at the Mukonyane home. They must try and trace the people who had allegedly done work there. And I was told one of them had emigrated to New Zealand. And I said to them, well, follow him. He might just be able to confirm or not confirm. And they found him, and he said, I've looked, and I've actually found invoices of 2014, 2015. I did work in the house. Here are the invoices. And he did an affidavit and attached. So I'm saying the investigators of the commission somehow are able to get some very old documents.
Yes.
And the one that Mr. Tsotsi is talking about are not 18 years old.
Only 5 years ago.
Yeah. So they should try.
Yes. Mr. Tsotsi, would you have received the submission from the minister of the list by way of email as well?
Yes, it came back by email, because the minister was, if I recall, she was in Mozambique at that time.
But then you say she called you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Seleg, I just want to get this out of the way in relation to these documents.
Yes.
In paragraph 20.1 of your affidavit, you say it was in mid-2014 when you met Mr. Salim Essa for the first time, but you don't say whether the rest of what you discuss under that, these documents, whether that was mid-2014 or whether it was 2015. In other words, was it in relation to the new board that came in December, or was it the first board that you chaired?
This was actually in December, Chairman.
Oh, this was in December.
December 2014.
Oh, okay. So it was in relation to the new board.
To the new board, yes.
Oh, that's quite interesting. That may explain certain things. that may explain certain things. Yeah, okay, all right. So this was in December
Yes, in December
2014,
2014.
after the new board had been appointed.
Correct, yes.
Yes. Mr. Selega, take it from there.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Tsotsi, we've seen yesterday that you have also used or have received documentation emailed to you from what you said was your private email address.
Yes.
Could that not have been used as well on this occasion?
No. No.
Could you assist us with access to that?
Yeah, I can give you
Email
my email
account.
address, but it's not the one I'm using now. It's the defunct email. But the reason I'm saying it couldn't have been is because I knew that I needed to communicate with the minister, and I could not communicate with her on the private email. So it was an Eskom email.
No, I'm talking your email, the email you received from Mr. Essa.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes.
I don't recall what the email address is. I would have a hard time trying to remember what that email address was. Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Salika, you can continue.
Thank you, Chairperson. You see, there is a report, a Fundutsi report. We have incorporated it into your bundle, Mr. Tsotsi, an extract from that report. Just to finalize on this aspect, it's in the smaller bundle, which is Eskom Bundle 07B. On page 1093.
Page 1093.
1093, that's the beginning of the extract from the report, Chairperson. I quickly want to draw your attention, Mr. Tsotsi, from that extract of the Fundutsi report to page 1099. It's paragraph 14.8 with the heading, the appointment of the Eskom board. Just to give you a sense of what the chairperson is talking about, I'm going to read from that report. It says, during our review of the DPE, that's the Fundutsi, emails, we determined that info portal 1 at zoho, zoho.com, played a role in the composition of various Eskom board subcommittees. We determined that on 6 March 2015, info portal 1 at zoho.com sent an email titled Eskom Committee to Davids on email address styled ankimwc@gmail.com, proposing various Eskom subcommittees. The following committees were proposed in the said email from info portal 1 at zoho.com to Davids. And then they give you a list. For audit and risk, number 1 is New Lady CA, Chair. The next is Viroshni Naidu, Nazia Karim, Romeo Kumalo, and Norman Baloy. You see that? The next is the tender and procurement. The names are as follows: Ben Gubani, Zitembe Koza, Nazia Karim, and Chwaita Mabude. And it carries on with the IF. What is IFC?
It's IFC now. Investment and Finance Committee.
Investment and Finance Committee,
Yes.
Thank you. And you have the names also for IFC, for People and Governance, for Social Ethics. Let me read People and Governance because that name has come up here often. you have Choita Mabude, Ben Gubani. They have Choita Mabude twice. First as a chair and then as a member. Romeo Kumalo, Venete Klein. You are familiar with these names, Mr. Tsotsi?
Yes, Chair.
Were these members of the board
Yes,
of December 2014?
that's correct.
And these were according to this research report, the names that were being proposed by an email coming from Info Portal for the composition of the subcommittees.
I see that,
You
yes.
see that. Now, if you go back in memory, can you recall whether you received a list that would have compartmentalized those names in the manner it is done here? In the sense that under this subcommittee, these are the names. In this subcommittee, these are the names. Is that what the submission would have been to you?
I don't recall, Chair, seeing any of this information.
No, please, no, understand me, sorry. I'm saying the email from Mr. Essa
Yes,
that you say you had received from him,
Okay.
or the submission you received from him, would it have done what is happening here?
precisely.
And is the position, I mean, you have already said that you sent your list to the minister,
Correct.
which was different from the list that Mr. Essa had sent to you.
Yes,
And the minister's response was to send you a list that was exactly the same as Mr. Essa's list. Is that right?
correct.
And you have said that, I don't know whether you said it or I read it somewhere, but understand that ultimately the minister said to you, the composition of the various committees would be as set out in her list.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And is that what happened? Or was her list implemented in the composition of the different committees or subcommittees of the board?
That's exactly how the first composition of the boards was done, yes.
Yes. So which would mean that the composition of the various committees of the board for the December 2014 board were in accordance with the wishes of Mr. Essa,
Correct.
which may have happened to be the same as those of the minister.
They were the same.
Yes. Okay. Would you be able, when you look at this composition of these committees, it might be difficult, would you be able to remember whether this composition is in accordance with exactly the various committees that were established? Or at least maybe in regard to the chairs, that might be easier to remember than every member. But if you can't remember, I will understand. It's been a few years.
No, I'm more likely to remember the committees that I was involved in.
Yeah. Okay.
I certainly remember that Kwaita Mabuda was the chairperson of People and Governance,
Yes.
because I remember that one.
And Dr. Ngubane in tender and procurement, do you remember? Or not really?
I remember that Mark Paminsky was the chairperson of the IFC, that I remember.
That you remember?
Yes.
Yes. So at least two you can remember. Tender and procurement, you can't remember whether Dr. Ngubane was the chairperson.
I don't quite remember that.
You are not sure about that.
I don't remember that.
Yes.
I think with Venete, I seem to recall that Venete was the first. I think she was also, she changed, I think, at some point, if I can recall, to go to People and Governance or one of those. But I think I do recall that she was initially in the chairperson of the Social and Ethics Committee.
Yes, yes. Well,
if it might help you, Mr. Tsotsi, the chairperson, if you turn to page 1102, the report actually shows you what was proposed in a table format, what was proposed on the left-hand side, and what the board actually approved on the right-hand side.
oh yes.
So you will see audit and risk, what is proposed from the email info portal. You got the names. Who is new lady CA? Mr. Tsotsi, and then first table there.
New lady CA. Oh. No, I don't. The only CA that I remember was Mr. Pametsky. I don't remember any of the ladies being CAs.
But
Yes.
okay, look at the table. You will see essentially all the names that are proposed are the ones approved for this audit and risk. So Viroshni Naidu, V. Naidu, Nazia Karam, N. Karam on the right, on the left, Romeo Kumalo, R. Kumalo on the left, sorry, and then on the right is the same person. So the only difference there seems to be Mr. Norman Baloy. He was proposed, but somebody else was appointed. Ms. Mabude.
Yes.
And it carries on like that with the other subcommittees.
What was, how did you feel about the fact that the minister, Mr. Brown, insisted that the committees of the board, various committees of the board, be composed in the manner indicated in her list, which was the same as the manner indicated in Mr. Salim Essa's list, and that your list of how the committees should be, your proposal of how the committees should be composed was ignored. How did you feel about that?
Chairman, I was very surprised. And at that point in time, which was very early in the new board's term, I mean, it was probably about a week and a half or so after the board had been appointed. And I was very intrigued by the whole thing, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what was going on. And it was not until I was then called by the minister to this meeting, where I saw Tony Gupta and Salim Issa. Then I said to myself, well, clearly the minister is operating under the, if you like, the persuasion of these people. That was the view I held, and the subsequent things that happened kind of confirmed that view for me. And I guess also what grew to me, because you remember the minister came in 2014, and I had, before the new board came along, we had something like maybe 3 months or so, I can't quite remember, overlap with the new minister after the departure of Minister Gigab, or could be more than 3 months. And you recall I've been saying that I was having difficulty establishing a working relationship with her. And then I was having these issues with Tony Gupta, even before the incident we just discussed earlier on. And I was then having difficulty with really getting the minister to work with me in a way that I would have preferred. And so when I put these things together, I began to think to myself, there's something that's driving her. And when I saw this in December, then I said to myself, I think this is what's driving her. This is what's determining whether I have a relationship with her or not. That's how I rationalized it at the time.
At the time that Mr. Salim Essa sent you his list of how the various committees of the board should be composed, did you understand him to be associated in any way with the Guptas, or did you not know that at that time?
Salim Issa, I mean, as I said, I was introduced to him by Tony Gupta. So right from the get-go, I mean, I knew that Salim was...
In mid-2014?
Yeah.
Also, when he sent you the list in December 2014, you could associate him at least with Tony Gupta?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Tsotsi, you might ask, but who is the person communicating from Info Portal 1? Turn to page 1108 in the same report. Under paragraph 14.12. Are you there?
Yes.
So I'm going to read to you. It says appointment. Now this is of board members at Alesco. It says, we determined that on 16 July 2015, Davids sent an email to infoportal1 at zoho.com from her private email address, styled, and they give the email address. The title of the email was Travan's CV. In the email, David stated the following, quote, Dear Salim, here with CV for Alesco board as discussed, close quote. And he carries on to say, we noted that Travan Marais Hasbrook's CV and a motivation letter purportedly prepared by Travan and dated 25 July 2015 were attached to the said email. The email above is an indication that Davids was communicating to a certain Salim / businessman. Full stop.
I see.
You see that?
Yes.
Seems to corroborate your receipt of a submission along the same lines from
Correct.
Mr. Salim Essa. Thank you, Chair. That's the end of that part from my side.
Yes. So it may well be, Mr. Tsotsi, that either a substantial number or a substantial percentage of the members of your 2015 board had some association or some or other association with the Guptas.
Chair, there was a expose by Amapungani at some point. I can't remember exactly when.
Yes.
And they had some kind of a diagrammatic representation of the linkages between some of the board members, the new board, with the associated functionaries of the Guptas. And so, if one is to accept the veracity of that work, one has to conclude that that must have been the case. At the time, I unfortunately was more focused on what was to be done in the company at the time. And so I didn't for a minute associate the board members in that manner, you know, any of them in that manner at that time. But I certainly started to understand shortly after I'd left, particularly with what happened with the Tegeta incident with the coal mine, and what was reported to have happened, and Eskom's involvement in supposedly funding the mine for Tegeta, and all the other things that came out of that. So I was rather taken aback by that. But the one overriding thing, Chairman, which I would not want to leave this commission without mentioning, is my view that I held at about the time when I was being pursued by the board for the fact that I was not fit to be a director, which unfortunately we haven't had the opportunity to look at here, but nonetheless,
yeah.
the impression
I know we are going there, but you can say what you want to say.
Maybe I should reserve
we'll get there, but I think go ahead and say what you want to say.
Yes. In the manner in which things were turning out, I had a distinct impression, and knowing that the Guptas were having some kind of a hand in things that are going on at Eskom, I had this distinct impression that there could be an orchestration of some exercise here to replace the top layer of Eskom with other people who are associated with the Guptas. And, you know, one doesn't have the concrete proof and evidence of these things, but one can associate events as they occur and be able to, as they say, connect the dots as incidences occur to be able to come to these kinds of conclusions. But that was my strongly felt feeling at the time.
Well, we will get to the points where the board turned on you. I certainly have the feeling, based on reading how the events happened the way they did starting from the 8th of March, 9th and 11th. But of course, they need to be viewed against your encounter with the minister and what Mr. Tony Gupta said to you. But when I see how the board that seemed to be going along with you when you came from the Durban meeting and you introduced the idea of an inquiry and so on, how they seemed to later turn against you. Certainly in my mind, I have a question mark as to what happened between the time when they seemed to be on your side, when you came with to test this idea, and then at a certain stage, they seemed to completely turn against you. It seems unnatural. It makes me think that there may have been some discussion outside of the board meetings, which may have happened, which led to the board turning against you the way it did. But one or more members of the board will come here and testify, will hear what they have to say. I'll put this to them as well. You made the point yesterday that after lunch on the 11th, you joined the People and Governance Committee and found them already discussing names of persons who would act in the positions of the executives. And you said to them, but I'm the only person who knows these people. So here's a new board. They're discussing names, but they don't know these people. So what have they done to inform themselves about these people? I have a suspicion that when you came to that meeting, there were no CVs of these people. There were no CVs, they were just names.
Yes.
So that all seems very strange. And then, of course, when you talk about having been given a list by Mr. Salim Essa of how the board committees should be composed, you wonder how that list of names of people to act in those positions, where it came from. You wonder where it came from and why the board or the committee members might not have thought it necessary to get more information about these people. And one would have thought that your presence as a board member who had been on the previous board and therefore knew the people around much better, why they wouldn't wait for you and hear what you had to say. So it raises various questions that need to be asked, and one needs to see what answers one gets. Yes, Mr. Slager.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Tsotsi, let's go into this because it may be significant. When you go back to page 20, or if you could please go back to page 21 of your affidavit. In paragraph, I'll give you a moment, sorry. Page 21, paragraph 17, and we will come back to the purported disciplinary action the board then took against you. Paragraph 17 says, I had already left Eskom. At the time, the decision to appoint Denton's was under discussion, referring to Denton's investigation. Now, we know from Mr. Matona and from your testimony yesterday that the executives were being suspended on the ground that the inquiry that was to be initiated should be an unimpeded investigation.
Correct.
You recall that. Before you resigned, let me use that word, who was the service provider appointed to conduct that inquiry?
The way things were at that point, Chair, before I left, the board had made a decision on the 11th that it would like Nick Linnell to assist it in coordinating the work that needed to be done before the service provider comes on board. Namely that he would deal with the matter of the suspensions and also assist the Audit and Risk Committee to formulate the terms of reference for the inquiry. So there was preliminary work that needed to be done, obviously before you could have a service provider in place, and that is the assignment that the board asked Nick Linnell to undertake.
So you are saying, you're saying to the chairperson, the board had resolved to appoint Mr. Nick Linnell.
Correct.
That resolution, was it on the 9th, at the meeting of the 9th, or at the meeting of the 11th?
It was on the 11th, Chair.
Yes.
Yes.
And they knew the circumstances under which you introduced Mr. Linnell to the board.
Yes.
And how you got to how he got to be at the meeting, or where you got him from.
Yes, Chair, because Mr. Linnell was introduced to the board on that same day, and this is probably something you may come to, but I just thought it's worthwhile mentioning that not only was it Nick Linnell who was asked to assist the board, one of the board members suggested that there is a gentleman who has expertise in communication, and we needed to put out a communicate to the public about what was about to be undertaken, namely the inquiry. And a name of a particular individual was proposed, and this board subcommittee responsible at the time, which was People in Governance, then acceded to the fact that let's have this individual also support, and he did do the work for the board. This was a man called Happy Nchingila. So the experience of, I want to use the word engaging these individuals was clearly demonstrated in the actions of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Tsotsi. And let's quickly see what Mr. Nick Linnell says before we turn to the board, come back to the board itself. Now he, as you have...
Mr. Slegg, I've just remembered, if you can, we ought to look at what Ms. Lynn Brown has to say about Mr. Tsotsi's evidence about the lists. We need to cover that if we haven't.
Yes.
To say, does she deny that the list that she gave to Mr. Tsotsi was the same as the list that Mr. Tsotsi had got from Mr. Eskom?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, can we put that version to Mr. Tsotsi right away?
At your, whichever you prefer. I'm happy.
Let's get it off the way.
Yeah.
That's, Mr. Tsotsi, that's the former minister's affidavit is on page 434.
I don't want to forget this question, Mr. Tsotsi.
Yes.
After you're done with that question, I would like you to address the question of why the minister was getting involved in how committees of the board were composed. But I just don't want to, let's deal with this and after that you address that.
Thank you, Chair.
What page did you say?
That's the former minister's affidavit is on page 434.
Okay.
434?
434?
34. Yes, 434.
Okay.
I should then find the passage where she specifically deals with the encounter you say you had with her. I believe is on page 440. Paragraph 56. Paragraph 56 under the heading General. Are you there, Mr. Tsotsi?
Yes, I am.
It reads, I cannot comment on a list that allegedly was sent by Mr. Essa to Mr. Tsotsi, as I have never seen it. Mr. Tsotsi never specified at any stage the composition of this list, nor did he ever indicate what his own drawn-up list looked like. It is inexplicable to me that in the execution of the board's task of appointing members of board committees, Mr. Tsotsi would not generate his own list, but would rather work from a list allegedly compiled by a stranger to Eskom. Then there's, it carries on, paragraph 58. I persist in denying that A. Mr. Tony Gupta and A. Mr. Salim Essa, whether together or individually, visited my official residence in Pretoria. I have explained the process that guided me in the appointment of members of the Risk and Audit Committee and the Social Ethics Committee. I have also explained how I communicated my decision to the Eskom Chairperson. When there is an unexplained delay in the implementation of my decision, there is nothing remiss in insisting that the Eskom Chairperson must implement my decision. The next page, there are a few things that are strange to me on this issue. It is for me curious that Mr. Tsotsi, upon his alleged receipt of the list from Mr. Essa, never on his own volition, as a conscientious chairperson, reported his alleged surprise to anyone. He never protested to me. He never raised his concerns with the Eskom board, as one would expect a conscientious chairperson to do. And he never volunteered this allegedly important information to the former public protector when she was conducting her investigations into Eskom. Having been appointed in December 2014, new directors had to be inducted to Eskom. This is an intensive program in which I play a limited role. Well, if you go back to paragraph 57, Mr. Tsotsi, the suggestion seems to be made there that not only did you show the minister the list given to you by Mr. Salim Essa, but that even your own list does not seem to have been given to the minister. It is inexplicable to me that in the execution of the board's task of appointing members of board committees, Mr. Tsotsi would not generate his own list, but would rather work from a list allegedly compiled by a stranger to Eskom. You see that?
Yes, I see that, Chair.
Any comment?
Well, I can't really say much, Chair, except to say I think one day the truth will come out.
I'm sorry, just repeat that. I didn't hear.
I'm saying, Chair, I can't really comment much, but I think and hope that one day the truth will come out as to what actually happened. But clearly she is denying that she ever communicated with me about this list,
Well,
as I put it.
Yes. Well, the way to deal with what she says, her version, when the evidence later gives you this opportunity, is that if you are sure that you did send him your list, and if you are sure that she sent you a list that was the same as the list you got from Mr. Essa, and that actually you did have a discussion with her about your list and her list, the way to respond is to say, what you said happened. You did speak about it, and if she says that did not happen, that is what she's saying is not true. If you are not sure, you indicate that you think there was a discussion, but you are not sure. So in other words, you need to be clear. If you are quite clear in your own mind, that's what must come out. But if you are not clear about it, you think maybe we did talk, maybe I'm mistaken, we did not talk, then you reflect just that. So what is the position?
Chairman, I'm perfectly clear.
Yes.
That I did communicate with the minister.
Yes.
The minister was on vacation in Mozambique. It was mid-December.
Yes.
And how I got to learn she was in a vacation in Mozambique was because Salim Issa told me that.
Yes, yes.
So
Yes.
I'm very clear that I
Yes.
did communicate with her. There's no doubt in my mind
Yes.
whatsoever.
So there's no doubt she was aware of your list,
Absolutely.
and she sent you a different list.
Yes.
And that list she sent you was the same as the list you got from Mr. Essa.
Correct.
And she had the occasion to speak to you and say you must implement her list
Correct.
and not yours.
Yes.
Yes. So about that you are quite clear.
Absolutely clear, Chairman.
Yes. What will need to be done, Mr. Seleka, if it hasn't been done, is to check whether she wasn't in Mozambique around mid-December, the minister, because Mr. Tsotsi says he can remember quite well that they had that discussion and that she was in Mozambique. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
We'll certainly do that, Chair.
Yes.
And then, Mr. Tsotsi, the chairperson's question was why, well, I paraphrase.
Yes.
Why Minister Lynn Brown was getting involved in the appointments for the subcommittees.
Because I would have thought that what committees or who serves in what committees should be a matter for the board. I mistaken in that regard?
Chairman, it is a matter for the board, it's always been.
Yes.
The only committee that the minister has the responsibility for putting together is the Statutory Committee, which is the Audit and
Risk Committee.
Correct. The rest of the committees are responsibility of the board.
On that one, she has a role to play.
That's correct.
But is her role, does her role include indicating who should serve on the committee, or is her role to make sure that there is a risk and audit committee? How it is composed should be left to the board?
My recollection, Chair, I may be wrong here, but my recollection is that she has the prerogative to appoint the chairperson of that committee.
Yes, okay. But
that's what I
your recollection.
Yes.
But that's the only committee where, to your knowledge, the minister has some role to play.
Correct.
Yes. So why was she then getting involved in how various other committees were composed, and why were you allowing her to be involved in that to the extent that you were going to implement her list when you had your own list that you believed was the right list?
Chair, the minister ordinarily, the board extends a courtesy to the minister to say, Minister, this is the selection of the board subcommittee, just so she's aware who was in which committee and so on. And in this instance, that was the intention. And hence, when I changed the list and sent it to her, it was precisely for that reason. Now, it became clear to me that she seemed to be fulfilling other interests. And so I took it that she was acting at the behest of someone else. And I certainly took it that at the end of the day, she is imposing this list on the board. And I didn't want to resist that at the time, because I just felt that perhaps this is not going to be a good thing to do, because it's important to keep relations with the shareholder for the smooth running of the business. So at that point in time, because she was relatively new in terms of the board, I knew that I was struggling with creating a relationship with her. So I had in the back of my mind that maybe if I let this go, it would be a way to try and restore some kind of level of, or improve the level of relationship to myself and her.
Okay. Did the board ever see your list that you had proposed? Or either before you sent it to the minister or after?
I doubt it, Chairman. I don't think so.
Yeah,
because, hang on, I might be wrong here. What we normally do when we make these suggestions about who's to act were based, by the way, on the CVs of the individuals. We normally communicate, especially to the people who would like to chair the committees. We normally communicate with them to say, look, I have a suggestion. I think this is the committee that you should chair, etc. And then, we try to fill in, and then we try to rationalize why you've put different people in the different committees. Now, I really don't recall whether that exercise, there was time for me in between all of this back and forth, whether in fact that actually happened. I really don't remember. Maybe some of the board members may be able to attest to that. But I don't remember myself.
I take it that ultimately, or at some stage, you circulated the minister's list of how the various committees should be composed. You circulated that to all the board members.
Yes.
Do you remember when it was that you did that? Would it have been prior to the meeting of the 9th and 11th, or did it happen either on the 9th or 11th of March?
No, it would have happened long before that.
Long before that,
Yes.
yeah. When you circulated that list, do you remember whether you circulated, whether you disclosed to the members that it was the minister's list of how the committees should be composed, or whether you didn't disclose that? You just said, here is a proposal of how various committees of the board should be composed. Let me have your views, or something like that.
No, I didn't disclose that this is the list that the minister has imposed on us.
Yes.
I just simply informed the board members
Yes.
of the listing.
But did you just inform them on the basis that that was the list, that's how the committees would be composed? Or did you circulate to them on the basis that there should be a discussion to see whether this list of how various committees should be composed was acceptable?
Well, and I shouldn't use the word inform, in the sense that I gave the board members copies of the list with the intention of them assessing for themselves,
Yes.
the suitability of themselves in those particular committees.
Yes. So any member could say, no, I don't think I fit into this committee.
Correct.
I would prefer to be in another committee, and so on.
Yes.
They could say that.
Yes.
Was the idea that they would say that ahead of the first meeting, or was it something that would be finalized at the first meeting of the board? The question of the committees. In other words, was the idea that the issue of the composition of the various committees should be finalized ahead of the first meeting, or was the idea that they could give their views, but ultimately the final decision as to how the committees of the board were to be composed would be made at the first meeting of the board?
Well, the way it worked, Chair, because of the fact that the board meeting was a bit distant, if you like, and there was work to be done, the committees began working immediately once they settled into the compositions that they were in.
Yes.
And if there was any feeling of an individual that they would rather be in another committee, then that would have come up then in the board.
That would have been sorted out ahead of the first meeting.
Ahead of the first meeting,
It would not wait for the first meeting.
No.
Yes. Would it be fair to say that the members of the committee, unless they had other information from somebody else, would have thought that this list represented your proposal, your idea of how the committees of the board should be composed?
That would be the case, yes.
That would be fair to say that.
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, if they had information from somewhere else, they might know that where the list came from.
That's correct.
That you wouldn't know. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Seleka.
In fact, in hindsight, I think that's the case, but I can't vouch for that.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Tsotsi, earlier you were articulating the view to the chairperson that actually coming to think about it, you think the executives were being removed to make way for other people.
That's correct.
Now, given what was being said was the reason for step aside or suspension of the executives not to influence the inquiry, did the board had any evidence of previous interference by these executives in any investigation within Eskom?
No, the board didn't have any formal information that was presented to it about any of that. However, it seemed during the processes that we were undertaking that specific board members had specific information about specific board members, or rather executives. And I think the reason why that attitude did not prevail or didn't gain any currency in the discussions was because the whole purpose was that the executives have done nothing wrong and that there is no intention of accusing them of anything wrong and hence subjecting them to suspension on that basis. So whatever was mentioned in regard to specific executives in any of the discussions didn't really gain any currency for that reason. But the board per se did not express itself on that. It did not take that position.
Yeah, it's just strange how a new board that has hardly done any work in an entity in its first meeting gets an idea that definitely came from outside of the entity, and they just run with it the way this board seems to have done so. You remove so many executives who I think were quite critical to the entity, just like that. And then, of course, you remove the chairperson of the board, who has been around for quite some time. All within 2-3 days, it's all done. It's just very strange to me. I would have thought that for something like this, a board would really need to reflect, need some time. They are new in the entity. But it seems they just ran with this idea that came from outside. Yes, Mr. Seleka.
Thank you, Chairperson. And so, Mr. Tsotsi, there is, you say the board doesn't make any allegation of wrongdoing against them, and that's not the basis why they were suspended. Is that correct?
No, yeah, correct. That's what it is.
That's not the basis on which they were. And I can see from your affidavit, you ultimately separate or resign from Eskom on 30 March 2015.
Correct.
And you say by the time Denton's was appointed, or in fact you say, I had already left Eskom at the time the decision to appoint Denton's was under discussion.
Yes.
So Denton's would have been appointed after you had left Eskom.
Yes.
Denton was not appointed in the meeting of the 11th of March, 2015.
No.
Now, let's see, we have the report of Denton's, and I want us to look at what was the mandate to Denton's when it ultimately gets appointed. And that report is contained on page 918 to 994. It's an extract of the report.
What page?
Page 918, Chairperson.
Is that in the smaller?
In the
bundle?
bigger.
In the bigger one?
In the bigger.
918.
Yes. (918) will be the cover page to the report, followed by the table of contents. And the introduction starts on page 922. I will read only certain paragraphs of the report. 1.1, are you there, Mr. Tsotsi?
Yes, I am.
Under background, it says this document constitutes the report of Denton's, South Africa, in respect of the investigation commissioned by Eskom, pursuant to a request for proposals issued on 8 April 2015 under a number they refer to there in terms of a resolution adopted by the Board of Directors of Eskom on 11 March 2015. Now, I don't know which resolution they're referring to there, but they say in 1.2 that the investigation commenced on 20 April 2015. Then you turn the page, Mr. Tsotsi, of significance to what I wish to refer you to. Paragraph 4, page 924. Paragraph 4, purpose of the investigation. Can you see that?
Yes.
4.1 says the institution of the investigation took place shortly after the highly publicized suspicion of 4 of Eskom's executives, bracket suspended executives. 4.2, the TOR, which is terms of reference, refers to the above-mentioned suspicions only obliquely, stating in respect of the investigation that it is important for the information to be tested by an independent party without ESCO's involvement, bracket particularly those members of ESCO whose areas would be directly impacted by the inquiry, so as to lend credence to the reports that the independent party would produce. 4.3, the written material setting out scope of the investigation never contemplated the investigation as being one that was directed specifically at the conduct of the suspended executives. The timing of the investigation led to speculation in certain circles that it was the conduct of the suspended executives that was being investigated. Our meetings with the board, an audit and risk committee of the board, it was confirmed that the investigation was not directed at the suspended executives and that the board was dealing with the suspended executives in accordance with a separate methodology. 4.9 says the TOR, the terms of reference, do not require investigation of misconduct of any specific individuals. Accordingly, no recommendations are made in respect of action to be taken to deal with misconduct by any specific individuals. You see all that?
Yes.
So it appears clearly from this report, and which seems to be consistent with the board's position, that we are not suspending you from misconduct, that even misconduct or wrongdoing was not within the scope of Denton's investigation.
Correct.
You see that?
Yes.
Now, the question is, and maybe it touches on the view you expressed to the chairperson, there is no allegation of wrongdoing against the executives. As you testified, Mr. Matona said, no concerns about the war room were raised with him. You told the chairperson you can't recall raising concerns directly with him. You recall that?
Yes.
You told the chairperson that the deputy president who was heading the war room did not raise concerns with you about information the war room was receiving from the executives.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Just articulate your response
Yes,
clearly.
yes.
So that, yeah, okay.
Denton's scope of investigation does not include investigating wrongdoing on the part of the executives or any individual, they say.
Yes.
There is, and I'm talking about interference, there is no evidence, you say, the board had about previous interference in an inquiry by these executives.
Yes.
Then the question remains, and that's exactly what the Commission is trying to determine, what then were the real reasons for the suspensions of these executives? And we know from Mr. Matona, they never came back. There were separation agreements in the end. And as you say, it was moving people out of the way to make a way for others. What would you say then were the real reasons?
Chairman, as I think more and more about this issue, and as I also reflect seriously on a number of things that have been happening, not just at Eskom, and knowing the appetite of the Guptas for acquisition of whatever assets they can lay their hands on, and having seen that also at Eskom itself, I came to the conclusion that they wanted to have people in the organization who would serve their direct interests, and that it would be easier for them to basically capture Eskom. That was, and it still is, the analysis that I ended up with on looking at what is going on.
Of course, about a month after the executives had been suspended, Minister Lynn Brown announced the secondment of Mr. Brian Mlefe to Eskom as Group CEO or acting Group CEO. And I think not long after that, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know how many months, Mr. Anuj Singh, I don't know whether I can't remember whether he was also initially seconded. I think he was seconded, but ultimately both of those two men were appointed to key positions at Eskom. Now, there are all kinds of allegations, and there is evidence that has been led in this commission as to certain roles that it is said they played at Transnet relating to various transactions. And if I find in the end that they had cooperated with the Guptas or the associates of the Guptas at Transnet, then there may well be a possibility that the Guptas had dealt with Transnet to their satisfaction and now wanted to move on to Eskom, but wanted people that they could trust would work with them, and didn't want people that they didn't know whether they would go along or not. There is that possibility. And when all evidence is in, it's one of the things that I must look at and see whether there is proper evidence to make a finding. So, but it is a possibility, and it may well be that it's the Guptas and their associates who were responsible for this whole idea of an inquiry that Ms. Mieni mentioned at the Durban meeting that you took to the board. You did say that independently of Ms. Mieni, you had a view about the need for an inquiry for yourself, but the suspension of the executives may have been part of that plan. Remove them so that you can then bring in people that the Guptas or their associates trusted would cooperate in whatever they wanted to do at Eskom. And it may be that they had worked their plan well, that in order to achieve that, you need to first capture the board or capture the majority of the board, so that when decisions have to be made by the board, they would know that the majority in the board would be people who would cooperate with them.
That's the first summary, Chairman.
Yeah. Mr. Selweka. Well, I want to raise on the same page that Mr. Selweka was asking you on, namely 925, the Stanton's report. At paragraph 4.6, it says, the TOR, that is terms of reference, and task order 1, state expressly that the purpose of the investigation was to obtain an independent view on the credibility and correctness of the reports of Eskom's executive committee escort to the board. Now, that sounds strange to me, because it suggests that the entire purpose of this inquiry that was being talked about on the 11th, as it turned out later, was to obtain an independent view, or was about the credibility or correctness of the reports that the executives were giving to the board. Is that how you understand that part as well? Forget about what you might have thought at that time, but if you read this sentence, is that what you understand as well?
Yes, that's my understanding, Chairman.
Yes. Now, if that is correct, then the question is, what information had the executives really sent to the board before the 11th, when the board had hardly had meetings? Now, of course, there may be, the committees had been established, and maybe the committees had started working, I don't know, before the first meeting. But it's strange. The board had not had any meetings. So when had the executives given information to the board whose credibility was being put in question?
That's exactly correct.
You understand what I mean?
I understand exactly, Chair, because the board would not have known the flow of information between the old board and the executive.
Yes,
So
yes.
that is not the reference point.
Yes, yes.
The board can only make judgments about information that it receives
Yes, yes.
from the executive. So what
And
information
that
has the board received from the executive?
And insofar as they may be talking about information given to the previous board, one would think that it would reflect that they are talking about the previous board.
Correct.
This doesn't say that.
Yes. Yes.
And obviously you are able to confirm, because you were the chairperson of this board until the 13th of March, you are able to confirm whether or not the executives had, by the 9th of March or 11th of March, supplied this new board with any information whose credibility was in question.
Yes, I would, Chair.
Yeah, and was there?
Especially because, Chair, prior to board meetings, the chief executive and I sit down and look at the agenda.
Yes.
And we actually discuss.
Yes.
Well, from my perspective, obviously, because I'm aware of Eskom's business to the extent that I can get into the technicalities.
Yes.
So we discuss in detail precisely what is being given, information that's been given to the board.
Yes.
So I pretty much know, ahead of a board meeting, what the board is going to discuss and the credibility of that information.
So as you sit there, what is your reaction to this when you hear that according to 4.6, Denton says their terms of reference and task order stated expressly that the purpose of the investigation was to obtain an independent view on the credibility and correctness of the reports of the Eskom's Executive Committee to the board?
What it says to me, Chair, is that if Denton's come up with a position which says the executives have not been providing the board with information that's credible and correct, then the board is in a position to attribute that to these executives they've suspended.
Yes.
So they are then able to point a finger and say, you people are guilty of misinforming the board or something to that effect.
But you are able to say from December, when this new board was appointed, to the 11th of March, there were no reports of any significance that the executives had given to this new board whose credibility was in question. Are you able to say that?
I'm able to say that, Chairman. And I'm also able to say that it would have been unlikely that the executives would have been able to assess the information in any case. I mean, the board members.
Yes.
Because they knew it, and it would have taken them a long time to really understand Eskom's business.
Yes.
To the extent that they will be comfortable that information is not credible.
And of course, if the executives had given this new board before the 9th of March or before the 11th of March reports that were questionable, I would imagine that the new board would have sought to first meet and say, what does everybody think about these reports? There would be a discussion of these reports to see whether the majority thought that they were questionable, thought that they had no credibility, and then they would then take a view as to what they should do about that, isn't it?
Correct.
Did that happen?
No, it didn't happen, Chair.
It did not happen.
No.
Okay. Excuse me. Mr. Selega, I think we should take the tea adjournment unless you want to follow up with something that should not wait. Unless
No,
you have
it can. It can wait. I had thought when we adjourn, I would have finished with Mr. Tsotsi.
Yes.
But I also appreciate that the chairperson might have questions arising from my questions.
Yes, yes.
So in that event, we could take a tea adjournment.
Yeah.
I'll be brief
Yes.
on our return, and the chairperson
Yes.
can then.
No, that's fine. As long as from your side, when you stop, you are satisfied that you have covered all the
Indeed.
important
Indeed,
areas.
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take the tea adjournment. It's about 29 minutes to 12. We'll resume at 11:45.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn. Okay, let's continue.
Yes. Chairperson. May I proceed, Chairperson? Or you are still...
You can
may
continue.
proceed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Tsotsi, as I indicated, we would, before the adjournment, that we would come to the disciplinary action the board then sought to take against you. And you deal with that on page 21, from page 21 of your affidavit. And I want us to consider that, sorry, I'll give you a moment to get there.
Okay, I'm there, Chair.
Yes. I want us to consider this together with the minutes of the meeting at which the board made this resolution to institute charges against you. That minute it's on page 679. It's a minute, and you will get to it, of the meeting of 19 March 2015. Page 679. Should I?
I'm contemplating whether to wait with this question until you are done with your question.
Chair, the floor is yours.
But if the motivation as to why the executives should not be there while the investigation was going on, whether you call it any allegations of misconduct on the part of the executives, why would it be thought that employees might not want to say, give certain information to the investigators when whatever information they may be asked about would not reflect on any allegations of misconduct on the part of the executives?
It's a good question, Chair. I can't specifically say why. One would just have to try to put oneself in the mind of the employees themselves. And I suppose the information for that sort of thing to happen. But like you're saying, the intention was not to find fault with them in terms of the terms of reference. In which case, if the contractor really understood their responsibility, then they would not be dealing with that kind of information. That would be irrelevant to their terms of reference. And so this shouldn't and wouldn't have come up. And if it did come up, I would be surprised.
Because one can understand a situation where it might be thought, since the investigations in a particular case, if an investigation in a particular case relates to allegations of misconduct on the part of the executives, one might understand the fear that employees might not feel free to talk to the investigators about the allegations of misconduct on the part of the executives, their bosses. But once you take misconduct out of the equation, it just seems to me that there might be very little to support the fear that employees might not be able to give information to the investigators that they may be asked to give, which has got nothing to do with allegations of misconduct.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, all right. Mr. Selega.
Thank you, Chairperson. So, Mr. Tsotsi, I was referring you to the minutes of the meeting of the 19th of March 2015.
Yes, I have.
And you said we must go to what page?
To page 680.
680.
Correct, Chair. The minutes start on page 679.
Okay.
Page 680, are you there, Mr. Tsotsi? Relevant to my point is paragraph 8.3, suspended executives. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Well, let's see who was present in this meeting. I see the members on page 679. You are also there as the chairperson.
Yes.
So you were in attendance of this meeting.
Yes.
Dr. Ngubane is there, Ms. Mabude, Ms. Klein, Ms. Naiju, Ms. Karim, Mr. Kumalo, and Mr. Baloy. Paragraph 8.3 reads, suspended executives. With regard to the letters from suspended executives, including the CE, it was agreed that the position was clear, that no charges would be preferred against the suspended executives at this stage. So that was still reiterated.
Yes.
No charges against these executives. Well, they say at this stage, but we know that ultimately no charges were brought against them.
Correct.
The legal department was authorized to send a letter that had been prepared in this regard. The chairman explained the...
No, I could not have said that, Chair,
Yes.
because the minutes of I think it's the in-committee
that you have had the opportunity to look at overnight. Apology for that. If you are ready, Chair, we...
Rest of the matters that we're dealing with, and but if there's any aspects from the side of Eskom that he feels that we should be aware of and state, he should let us know. So, Nick, the purpose of what we have here is essentially
if the chair doesn't hear, I think we can stop and Mr. Tsotsi can relate what he's saying. Mr. Tsotsi, you use the name.
Thing is just
this investigation is inquiry. Those
say that is still my voice, so that whoever.
All this time, you confirmed.
all along it was me who was speaking, yes.
It was you speaking. Thank you, Chair. Shall we go to timestamp 358?
H?
No, I want them to go to timestamp 358.
sorry.
Certainly, Chair, maybe if I could start in reverse order, maybe share with you and get your regard.
Whose voice was that, Mr.?
That's sorry, but we are contracting with you, not with E and S.
And he's speaking to Mr.
Linnell, yes.
Thank you, Chairperson. Then there's the last portion on this. Timestamp 1 hour, 07, 23 seconds. Give me the page reference. It's on page 743 of the transcript. 107:23.
Almost, I agree with you.
Sorry.
Thank you, we've answered.
We've made this session argument.
I'll just wait until. Okay, can we do this then? Nick, the mandate we'd like to give you is, as you were explaining, one of.
Got it. You have it. Page 675 on it's a minute of Eskom, minutes of the Eskom Holdings People and Governance Committee. It says minutes of the People and Governance Committee meeting. The number is given and the date is 11 March 2015 at 14:58. Present members is Mr. Z. Koza, Ms. N. Karim, who is indicated as having left early, Ms. C. Mabunde, Ms. P. Naidu, Dr. P. Naidu, beg your pardon, Ms. D. Naidu, Mr. N. Baloy, Mr. Z. Tsotsi, and Ms. V. Klein. You see that?
Yes, Chair, and I would like to add something.
Yes, please.
When we finished the board meeting to go into this session of the People and Governance Committee, as a board invited any member who was interested, other than a member of this committee, was welcome to come into the meeting and participate. Hence, you hear the voice of Dr. Ngubane, whose name it does not appear. So,
sorry, Mr. Tsotsi, we've got 2 minutes, and that may explain
okay,
the dilemma you are trying to resolve to the chairperson. Let's see, there are also minutes on page 660 is yourself, Mr. Tsotsi, the chairman of the board, Dr. Ngubane, Ms. V. Naidu, Ms. N. Karim, Ms. V. Klein, Ms. C. Mabude. Ms. Karim is still also indicated as left early, Ms. Z. Koza, and Mr. N. Baloy. Then there's people in attendance as well, Mr. M. Pukubia, the company secretary, Mr. N. Tsolanku, GM Legal and Regulatory, and Mr. N. Linnell. Okay, to the chairperson who signed and which date?
Chair, the minutes were signed by Dr. Ngubane on the 18th of November 2016.
Again, nearly 2 years after. Now, we look at the charge, the first charge leveled against you.
Before you proceed, Mr. Zola.
Thank you, Chief.
Those other minutes.
No, I did not outline the misdemeanors. What happened was these were statements that were made by people during the meeting, and I then indicated in the summary that these are the things that people are saying. I did not.
The director, is that, who are they referring to? Is that
They're
you?
referring to me.
Procure the services of an external consultant, Mr. Nick Linnell, to provide consulting services to the company without following the company's prescribed procurement processes or informing the board of his actions. In so doing, the director crossed the line from being a non-executive director to exercising executive power without the requisite authority. Now, your comment on that, did you procure the services yourself of Mr. Linnell?
No, I did not.
Did you fail to inform the board about your actions to procure the service, to have Mr. Linnell engaged as a consultant?
No, I had no reason to inform the board about something that did not happen. The board knew what Linnell had been doing and what his role was. And the board welcomed that role.
So how did you react to this charge? Because we hear in the clip that you are there with the board members talking to Mr. Nick Linnell and agreeing to him being contracted by the board. How did you react to this?
Chair, if I can just read my response, I mean, I think will encapsulate my reaction. I'm quoting, I traced the history of Nick Linnell's activities from the time of the 9 March board meeting, the support he gave to both the board and the ARC, which said preferred that the board handle it. Mr. Linnell could only be considered employed by the board if he had a written letter or contract signed by the chairman, or had received some remuneration or compensation for the work he had.
22, I think that's where you are. Paragraph 18.3 reads, the consultant commenced with his work to the knowledge of the director and without the board of directors being informed that the work had commenced within the company. The director was aware that no contract arrangement for the consultant had been concluded, thus exposing the company to non-compliance with applicable statutes and procedures. And how? Well, I see your response is there. How did you deal with this allegation?
And incidentally, I also, a media specialist, Mr. Happy Njingila, to review a media statement that had been produced by the PNG on precisely the same basis that Nick had been assisting the PNG.
Mr. Select, the part that reflects how the board appeared to turn on Mr. Tsotsi, on its own chairman, its chairman, how we got to the charges.
Okay.
In other words, I think there was a meeting, there was a lot of discussion, and people said certain things before you got to the stage where charges were formulated. I think that part is important to see.
Correct.
How you move, the meeting moved from a certain point where it seemed to be going fine, no problems with the chairperson, and how later on it changed.
Yes.
So if we haven't covered that, I think it's important to cover development.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah. Yes, and indeed that's not apparent from the document.
So see, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, Chair, I do, certainly.
Yes, there is a part how the whole thing seemed to develop. So it might or might not be in this statement, but as you read, you wonder how is this happening? What has happened? What has changed? So you say you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, Chair, I do.
Yes. Do you want to tell us about that? You must have felt at a certain stage since the 9th of March, since that meeting, how the board maybe seemed to be with you, and maybe at a certain stage on the 11th of March, And then exactly when you began to see a change of attitude, ultimately how everything then went up to charges being formulated. That's the impression I have from what I've read, that there's that development, you know. But you must tell me if you don't know what I'm talking about.
Yes, Chair. What happened is that after the conclusion of the suspensions, I then the board agreed that there should be a press conference to these suspensions. And,
or maybe before you do that, at the meeting of the 9th of March, that meeting you said was very brief.
yes,
Okay. Because the board decided they would like to have the minister address them.
yes.
Now, at that meeting, did you...
Chairman, I can comfortably say no, there wasn't any
There wasn't any.
attitude, yes.
Yes. Then you go to the 11th of March.
Yes,
You said there was a meeting of the board before the minister arrived.
yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
At that part of the meeting of the board before the minister arrived, did everything go smoothly?
Yes, Chair, everything went well. In fact, to the extent that the board was insistent that I should chair the PA, because the board acceded, and this is very interesting,
Yes.
the board acceded to the fact that they really didn't know much about the organization, the people involved,
Yes.
and so on. So they
Yes.
felt that they were more comfortable if I was leading
Yes.
the process,
Yes.
which is what then happened.
Yes.
And this happened also with the introduction of Nick Linnell, as we heard a little on the tape. And as I say, at the conclusion of the suspensions, up to that point, there was no indication of any
Actions that were taken by the board at that meeting before the meeting with the minister, if there were decisions that were taken, or was it just a briefing?
The meeting before the minister had decided, this is now the in-committee meeting, because there were two meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll only deal with the one with the in-committee.
Yes. Okay.
That meeting deliberated quite extensively on how to deal with the issue of suspensions and what the impact this might be and so on. So there was quite a robust discussion.
Also the issue of the inquiry, I guess.
On the issue of the inquiry, yes.
Yes.
And I recall, maybe an evidence leader will correct me on the basis of the sequence of events, that by the time the minister was due to speak to the board, by the time she had arrived, the board had taken the position that it would like to explore rather entertain what the minister's report is going to be on the specific issue of the inquiry, and that it would then wait for the minister's inputs before it takes or makes a determination as to which way to go.
So the meeting did not make any final decision on the inquiry and on the suspensions of the executives. I'm now talking about the meeting before the minister arrived. But there was a discussion on these issues, and the meeting said we would like to hear the minister's input on these issues before we take final decisions.
And that is the position, Chair.
That is the position.
Yes.
And at that meeting, everything was going smoothly.
Yes.
There seemed to be no animosity towards you on the part of anybody in the meeting.
Yes, Chair.
Yes. You wanted to emphasize earlier on a point about when that meeting was concluded, you wanted to say something about the executives, and I think I interrupted you. I think there was something you wanted to say as to what the meeting was saying about the suspension of executives.
Okay, if I remember well, there was no set feeling about suspensions. There was no conclusive thinking that the executives should be actually suspended.
Yeah, okay.
So the affirmation of suspensions happened after the meeting with the minister.
Yes.
And I think that's an important observation from my perspective.
Would it be correct to say that that meeting before the minister arrived was used to inform the members of the board as much as possible about this issue of the inquiry and the suspensions without them being asked to make any decisions because the minister was still going to address them?
That is the case, Chair.
That would be correct, yeah.
Yes.
And then there was the next meeting was the meeting between the board and the minister, is that right?
Yes.
It's a board meeting at which the minister was invited.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes.
And when the minister came in, she addressed the board, and she pronounced herself on the suspensions and on the inquiry.
Yes.
And gave the board what would be a leeway or mandates to proceed.
Yes.
With both the inquiry and the requisite suspension.
Yeah. And during the time when the minister was there, the members of the board participated in a discussion, and there was a discussion on these issues, or they just allowed the minister to address them with a view that they would have their own deliberations after the minister had left.
No, the board members engaged with the minister.
They engaged with the minister.
They asked various questions and even other issues outside of the inquiry issue.
Yes. And you chaired that meeting.
Yes. The minister had committed at the induction that she would like to be able to see the board on a reasonably regular basis.
Yeah.
Touch base with how the board is doing and how things are.
Yes.
She's pretty much in touch with the business of the company.
Yeah.
So this was one of those occasions where the minister used that opportunity just to talk a bit about some of her thoughts about what situations are facing from her perspective.
Now, by the time the minister had to leave, I take it no decisions were taken while the minister was there.
No, Chair.
Yeah. But was it pretty clear which way the board seemed to be going in regard to suspensions and the inquiry?
It was clear, Chair, because nobody on the board either countermanded what the minister was saying or gave a different view from hers.
Yes.
So one, had the distinct feeling that the board is going along with the thinking that the minister had brought on this issue of the inquiry and the suspension.
Yes. Now the minister then left.
Yes.
And then the board continued on their own. Is that right?
Correct. The board continued, and the engagement was quite robust.
Yes.
And at the end of it, there was a decision that the board then made, and the board said that they would entertain the setting aside of the 3 executives.
Which was basically the suspensions.
Suspensions, yeah.
You say of the 3 executives.
If I recall well, yes, Chair.
Yes.
And-
went there for.
And
Didn't
the
after
fourth,
the minister
the fourth
added.
came into the picture in the afternoon.
Oh, is that so?
Yes.
Oh, I thought the minister added the fourth one earlier.
The minister might have, I stand to be corrected here, the minister might have made reference to 4 executives. But what I seem to recall was that there was a pushback, certainly from me, there was a pushback against having the
Financial director.
financial director included in that. I would have to confirm, Chair.
Unless I'm confusing, was the financial director's name added at the Durban meeting?
No, sir.
Yeah, because I think I've had evidence or I've read somewhere where I think it was, either Mr. Matrona or yourself said the minister added the financial director's name, which had not been included. Mr.
That could
Selega,
possibly be my affidavit, yes.
Mr. Selega, you want to assist?
It is in Mr. Tsotsi's affidavit,
Oh, okay.
where he says that the minister joined the meeting, mandated the board to carry out the suspensions of the executive. She even added the name of the financial director
Yes.
who was not part of the original 3 executives.
Yes. And that is at the time when the minister was attending this meeting of the board.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it was 4 executives that were being discussed after the minister added that name.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Now, after the minister had left, the discussions continued and the atmosphere, did you detect any negative or hostile attitude towards you on the part of any members of the board at that stage?
Chair, there was, during this meeting, there was pushback against the director of the financial director being part of the executives. I think, if I recall well, Pomensky was also very uncomfortable.
Was uncomfortable about that?
Yes, about having the FD
Included?
and for reasons which I agreed with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I.e. as a custodian of the company's finances, the FD and the financial position of Eskom was very precarious at the time, and this would in fact reflect negatively, as well as the fact that, you know, the finance division is one that dispenses funds to the others for operational reasons, and you know, it doesn't merit an inclusion into the inquiry to the extent that there could be a need to do it. So the discussion kept going back and forth regarding that.
Yeah.
And I recall speaking to, in my affidavit, I think I raised the issue of speaking to the minister on the phone and seriously questioning why we should be adding the finance director. And the minister retorted that we should do as, you know, as we have been guided in terms of who the executives should be suspended.
When she was at the meeting of the board and she added the name of the financial director, before she left the meeting, did anybody say, what has the financial director done? Why must we add her? Did anybody say that? And if there was, how did the minister respond?
No, there was nobody who
raised that.
Yes.
But you raised it telephonically afterwards, later, with the minister?
Yes.
Or on the same day?
On the same day, yes.
Yeah, and effectively you were questioning why the financial director should be included in the suspensions. And did she give you reasons why the financial director should be included?
She did not give me concrete reasons. All she said to me is that we should proceed as in the manner that we have been advised to proceed.
Advised by her.
By her, yes.
So she comes to the board. The board has got 3 names of executives to be suspended. She adds another name. When you ask her why, she doesn't give you reasons, but she says, in effect, the board must do as I've said it should do.
In fact, yes.
Yeah. But going back to the atmosphere towards you,
Yes.
at that point now, they were talking about the meeting of the board after the minister had left. Was there anything that suggested that there was a negative or hostile or unfriendly attitude towards you by members of the board?
Chair, I think when I began to sense something when the pushback happened against the suspension of the FD, there were some board members who were decidedly firm about, no, we can't exclude the FD. We shouldn't.
Okay, now you were against you were against the inclusion of the financial director. Is that right?
Correct.
But are you saying you were not the only one? There were a number of other members of the board.
This was the spectrum solutions. If the people were to be removed from their offices, or should not be at their offices for the duration of the inquiry. As I say, notwithstanding that, there was still quite some discussion about, let's not forget the intent. The intent is not to punish these people. The intent is not to prejudice them and so on. And there were questions, that were asked by one or two of the different members as to really, is there really no way to avoid using the suspension route? Yeah, this happened especially when Nick was now part of the meeting. So,
okay. So at the end of that meeting, namely the one which came after the minister had left, at the end of that meeting, you were sensing something, but nothing concrete. Oh.
Yes, Chair, I was sensing there's something else that happened in that meeting, which incidentally is not recorded.
Yeah.
Which gave me quite a bit of apprehension, which kind of clouded my mood altogether. And I don't understand why, and this is important, Chair, my view. I see no reason why this particular conversation is not part of the recorder. Because the recorder system was there. And we're in the same room. And if there are audio problems, the technicians are there to take care of that. Now, the issue I'm talking about is the discussion about the people who were supposed to act.
Who were?
Supposed to act.
To act, yeah.
Yes. That discussion took a strange turn in my view. First of all, the purpose, among others, of the P&G committee was to come up with the names of the people who were supposed to act in the places of these executives to be suspended. What happened was I came across names that were had been produced from somewhere. And the first question I asked is, where on earth do these names come from? Because none of you in this meeting know anything about the executives at Eskom. To the extent that you can say that this person is qualified to act. And the response I got was that these names came from the minister. And specifically, this was the response I got from Dr. Ngubane. Now, I was taken aback because the minister doesn't know anything about who has got the capacity or the capability of acting. She wouldn't know. So immediately I had the sense that there is some hand here, an external hand that is driving this particular process. This applied to 3 of the executives, that is finance, that is group capital, and that was commercial and technology. Now, when it came to the chief executive, the suggestion was that Zethembe Khoza should act. Now, I have a very clear recollection of the fact that Zethembe said immediately that he doesn't feel he is up to it. And Zethembe had just come from, at that time, I think he was involved with Telkom somewhere, in Telkom's business. And there was a dismissal of his concern that, no, go ahead, you'll be fine, you should do it. And I was uncomfortable with that. And quite frankly, I felt that he was out of his depth. Admittedly, I did not know him, but I didn't have the comfort level in having engaged with him for the brief time that I did, that, you know, this would be something he could deal with. I will not cast any aspersions on his performance as acting FCE. I mean, that's for others to do, but I'm just saying that was my feeling at the time. So I'm saying, Chairman, that exercise and the way it was pushed made me begin to wonder what actually is going on. For the first time, I had a sense that something was afoot. So that is when I felt that things beginning to go in a direction which is not a positive direction.
But that is now, you say, at the meeting of the People and Governance Committee.
Yes.
That's not the same, or is it meeting that happened after the minister had gone?
That is the meeting, something like that.
Yes, well, I think earlier on you may have said that the board decided that the board, at the meeting immediately after the minister had left, the board decided that certain issues should be dealt with by the People and Governance Committee. Is that right? The suspensions.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
And that is now the execution. Was that going to be the execution in?
Yes.
Yeah, the decision had been made.
Yes.
Yeah. And then who were going to act in the positions of the executives to be suspended. That was one of the issues that the board said should go to the People and Governance Committee.
Yes.
Yes, okay. And the People and Governance Committee, did it happen after lunch?
Happened after lunch, yes.
Because yesterday you said you went to lunch and then when you came back, you were 10 minutes late to that meeting, is that right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So, but by the end of the meeting of the board that happened after the minister had left, the position is that you had sensed something, but nothing concrete as yet about the board's attitude towards you, or some members of the board, their attitude towards you, or not really?
Not really, not by the end of the board meeting before lunch.
Okay.
Yes.
It was only at the People and Governance Committee that you began to sense that there was some other hand.
Before that? Before that. Yes, because the board, I'm trying to remember now, Chair, at what point the pushback, no, I think you're correct. I've got the sequence wrong. Yes, the pushback against the FD, I think occurred after the meeting with the minister.
Yes, yes, yes,
Because
yes.
the board, it was a full board.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
That gave
So
you,
that's when, yes, you're
you
correct.
started
That's when
sensing.
I began to
Yes,
sense that something
yes.
is not right.
Yes, but nothing concrete, but just a sense.
Yes.
Then at the People and Governance Committee meeting, did you begin to have feel anything concrete? Was your sense that there was something, and was it just about something, or also the attitude towards you? Did it begin to change or not really?
Well, Chair, as I said, you know, the way the acting roles were dealt with simply heightened the apprehension now that I started to develop. It really pushed it to a point where I now said to myself, surely there's something afoot here. Because
Yeah.
I was convinced without any reasonable doubt that there was no way anybody in the entire board other than
We're just sensing that there was something and some outside hand outside of the committee or the board, but you were not sensing any towards you as chairperson, any negative.
Yes, that I think is fair to say.
Yes.
I was not sensing anything towards me specifically, but that there was something in on the go, which
Yes. Yes.
I couldn't really fathom.
Yes, that meeting of the People and Governance Committee, it ended with an endorsement of the names that you were told had been given by the minister as the people would act in the positions of the executives.
Yes,
That was confirmed.
yes.
Yeah. And you were given no answer with regard to, but you people don't know these people. The only answer you were given was the minister gave these names.
That's right.
And when you said, but the minister wouldn't know those people themselves, nobody said anything when you said that?
Nope.
Okay, all right. Now, this part that I'm talking about, where it seemed that the board was turning on you, it may be that you did give evidence about it previously, and that's where it comes, where I'm getting from. Did you cover that when you gave evidence previously about how you were kicked out?
I probably referred to my own suspension.
Yes.
As an indication, Chair, that the board has turned against me.
Mr. Seleka, have you had a chance to look at the previous evidence? Do you know whether it was covered? Because I don't want us to cover something that we have covered.
Yeah, I think I've read his testimony at the plea. Yeah.
Yes. You remember there is a meeting where you came with a lawyer.
Yes.
To the board meeting, and there were discussions.
That's when he's already in the suspension.
Yes.
No.
So do you think you covered that last time when you gave evidence? I just want to make sure we don't leave out
Yes.
something important. You can't remember,
I don't recall, Chair.
but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
The meeting
yes.
was in the evening, and I think your counsel was Advocate Kasim, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's
Yes,
correct.
Nazir Kasim.
Okay. Okay, I know where you are.
You know, yeah. So
Yes.
basically, I just want you to cover at what stage the board began to accuse you of doing this or that or not doing that and that, and beginning to when then they started to basically put you in the dock, and then and up to the end.
Let me just quickly cover that, Chair, if I may,
Yes,
just so we
yes, yeah.
can bridge that gap.
Yes, yeah.
For press conference the following day, that would have been around the 12th, 13th, maybe. But there was a time then when Linnell was focusing his attention now with assisting the ARC committee.
The Audit and Risk Committee.
Audit and Risk Committee. Now, Nick reported to me that on the morning of the 17th, that was now at about 4:20 a.m., he received an email from the Secretariat, which said to him, look, your scheduled meeting with the Committee of Audit and Risk has been, you are no longer required to attend that meeting. And essentially, the people that he was due to interact with that day, everybody seemed to stand off. And there was a point where he had an arrangement to meet with Ms. Mabude as part of the work that he was doing. I think that meeting also got cancelled or something to that effect. And he does say in his evidence, I don't know what it is.
Should I assist, Chair, with
Yes, please.
page references? That's from page 152, Chairperson.
I just realized now that we have gone past 1 o'clock. But let's quickly, just cover this part. And
Yes,
then,
Chair.
Yeah.
The evidence leader has promised to buy me lunch, Chair, because I didn't want to bring my lunch today.
I offer to do that, Chair.
Yes, 157.
His affidavit, Chairperson, the relevant sections that Mr. Tsotsi is referring to are on page 152 and 153.
Yes,
But page 151 gives you the context.
yes.
So if you look at page 152,
Oh, this is the earlier affidavit.
that's Mr. Nick Linnell's affidavit to this commission.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
He says at paragraph 34, so he's explaining 151, he comes out of the meeting, there's a press conference.
Yes.
The press conference, Mr. Tsotsi announces the suspensions, announces him being appointed as a coordinator,
Yes.
and then he deals with what happens thereafter.
Yes.
He
Yes.
then, because he's appointed as a coordinator, he receives paragraph 34. Following that, I received a number of communications from Eskom, including an invitation from Mr. Naiju. I think that should be Dr. Naiju.
Yes?
A director to join the board's Recovery and Build Program Review Committee. Work included reference to the board's intention to commit a deep dive investigation. This is relevant to the recognition that the inquiry was underway. Then he receives an invitation to attend the Audit and Risk Subcommittee. The dates are 19 and 23rd.
Yeah.
On the 12th of March, Minister Brown releases a media statement dealing with the suspension of the inquiry. And I was, about that time, required to provide my proposed draft terms of reference. Now, that's all around the 12th of March. Then you go to page 153, paragraph 40. He says, I emailed the first draft of the terms of reference to Ms. Mabude and the company secretary on Sunday, 15 March 2015. Paragraph 41, on the evening of Monday, 16th, I had a discussion with Ms. Mabude regarding the terms of reference which I to allow me access to the input received from the executives. There was a notable cooling of enthusiasm. That conversation ended with an agreement that I would meet Ms. Mabude the following morning at around midday. 17 March. Then this is what Mr. Tsotsi is talking about. At 4:50 a.m. on the 17th of March, I received an email from Mr. Tulo Selele, copied to the company secretary, purporting to inform me that the Board Audit and Risk and Compliance Committee would now be handling the forensic fact-finding inquiry. I assumed to be referring to an inquiry I was preparing for. I was informed that I was no longer required to attend the meeting previously arranged.
Yeah, so maybe I got a lot of the information from
here.
this affidavit, because there you can see that there seems to be a change of attitude towards
right.
Mr. Linnell as
That's
well. And I think either simultaneously or soon thereafter, there seems to be a negative or hostile attitude on the part of the board towards Mr. Tsotsi.
Yeah.
Is that right, Mr. Tsotsi?
Well, answer the chair.
Yes,
Yes, Chair, that's correct.
Yes.
Barring what you want to say, evidence leader, but I was going to say it is then 3 days later,
Yes.
essentially 2 days later,
Yes.
on the 19th,
Yes.
that the committee then first indicated that I was going to be charged
Yes.
for whatever the reasons they gave at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was now patently clear
Yeah.
that something had been happening,
Yes.
and that between the 16th and the 19th,
Yeah.
something very specific happened.
Yes. Yes.
Now,
Okay.
I don't know if this appears in this affidavit, but Mr. Linnell has his own view of what happened in the night of the 16th,
Yes.
which he shared this with me at some point.
Yeah.
What is the reference there of that specific? I just want to make sure I'm...
Sorry, what do
Where he
What do you have?
Where he gave his thinking of what happened.
Yes, I think it's somewhere in this. Is it in this affidavit? I've seen it in one of his documents.
Well, if you tell Mr.
Yeah, tell me
Seleke what it is,
Yes,
he might know where to find it.
Okay. Chair, what Nick said was that he heard that there was a secret meeting that night where some of the board members were in attendance together with it says the suspended executives, and Salim Issa is said to have been in that meeting together with Tony Gupta. There's no indication of what was discussed, but there is a clear indication of what transpired. What seems to be the impact of whatever was discussed in that meeting. It certainly had a direct impact on what Nick Linnell was supposed to be doing.
Yes, yes.
And ultimately, I think,
Yes.
on what on my own position.
Yes.
Because it was on the 19th of the 19th board meeting that
Yes.
the whole issue of accusations against me began.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, all right.
May I?
Mr. Seleke, if it's here, it's on affidavit. One will look at it, but you can highlight what you think you haven't highlighted in relation to your removal. If you, whatever you think you might not have highlighted that you would like to highlight, to say, out of the process, out of my removal, here are the important things that I would like to highlight. So, but maybe we could take the lunch break, and then when you come back, you can quickly deal with that, and then we move to what Mr. Leke wanted to cover.
Yes.
But the lunch break would give you a chance to reflect on what it is that you think is quite important in relation to your removal that you would like to highlight.
Yes, thank you.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Let's take the lunch break now, and we will resume at 2:30. We are
Thank you, Chair.
All rise.